Comedian and general celebrity Trevor Noah has a podcast called What Now? And he was interviewing the author of the book Sapiens, a gentleman named Noah Yuval Harari. He's come out with a few different books and he just came out with a new one. But they were talking, as a lot of people are these days, about AI. And what was really cool is that he cited AlphaGo as sort of like the key pivotal moment in the AI revolution, and kind of talked about how when Lee Sedol played AlphaGo, what Noah was describing is that when that event happened with AlphaGo, he saw Go as almost like strategies for how to live life. And when AI came in, it really just completely shattered human players' perception of what the best moves are in Go and things like that. And so it just forced the Go world to completely rethink what certain moves are. I'm a lower level player, but I think higher level players would agree that in some ways that's true, but in some ways that's not true. There's a lot of moves that were played by Go Seigen or Shusaku or very famous Go geniuses in other times, and AI would actually back them up and show that they were good moves. So it's a nice story, but obviously we're in the world of Go, so I think we understand that there's nuance to it. The part I love the most, Trevor Noah is multilingual. He speaks 6 or 7 different languages. He's from South Africa. And so he's very, very good with language and speaking. And what cracked me up is that he would refer in the AlphaGo games to Lee Sedol as Lee Sudong. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. Lee Sedol. It's probably Isedol, something closer to that. But he would just repeat it mispronounced over and over again. It seems like either the author of the book just didn't want to correct him or I don't know what. But it was cool to see that they talked about how AlphaGo was this really pivotal representation of the AI revolution and how it's inspired creativity. By the time this recording comes out, everybody knows this, but Demis Hassabis, who is the head person of DeepMind and AlphaGo and now the head of Google, just received a Nobel Prize in part for his work with AlphaFold by way of AlphaGo. So certainly a bit of a backing up there of how important those things were. So very cool. I know we all attach to that quite strongly as Go players. So, all right, we will get started. This is All Things Go. I was introduced to our next guest by Devin Fraze because he's a fellow Go organizer, and he's also a very strong amateur player who grew up in a strong Go playing country in Asia. By the end of the conversation, it was great because I was really energized about the prospect of being able to play in a tournament and what makes tournaments so great, even though I have not yet played in one. So with that, we're going to get over to my conversation with Albert Yen. Albert Yen is an 8-dan amateur player from Chicago. He first started playing Go at the age of 5 after watching Hikaru no Go on television, and became a 6-dan in Taiwan when he was 7. Albert continued to compete in America after he moved to Chicago in the 5th grade and studied under Jiang Mingju, a 7-dan professional. And to date, he has made several showings in national and international tournaments, including winning representation to the World Youth Go Championship in 2014, first place in the Redmond Cup in 2015, and 4th place at the 2019 World Amateur Go Championship. He is an NAOL reviewer and published his first Go book titled Overcoming Human Ego in 2021. And Albert is currently a 3rd-year student in University of Illinois Chicago's Medical Scientist MD PhD training program and is studying to become an academic radiologist. And outside of Go, Albert enjoys running and ping pong. So Albert, welcome.
Yep, glad to be here today.
What was it like getting into Go in Taiwan as a 5-year-old?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I just caught on the peak wave of the Hikaru no Go frenzy, honestly. In normal TV cartoon, I saw it, and then I live in Taipei at the time, which is the capital and probably the most urbanized city. And I just told
Mhm.
my parents that, hey, like this looks super cool. Like I want to try it. And that was around the time where I think my parents were considering sending us to like art classes, piano lessons. So go just follow the same trend, just try different hobbies. And that turned out to be the one that stuck. We were lucky that there was a Go school within, I think, maybe a mile from where we lived. So it was just super convenient.
Do you credit the fact that you grew up in what they call like one of the kingdoms of Go, right? Taiwan is very much steeped in the culture. Do you credit living in Taipei and Taiwan as helping with that and the fact that that Go school was a mile away?
Oh, absolutely. Because learning Go was like as easy as taking piano lessons, at least in Taipei. It's very easy
Mhm.
and accessible. So you could really explore the interest early on. There is still that competitive culture where there is a path like becoming an insei, and then if you want to be like a strong amateur or become even a professional player. So that path was very much visible as I was going through the Go training. I didn't want to be a pro or anything, but there's a complete ecosystem, I would say. And even have like other classmates who decided to compete abroad. Like a few went to China, some went to train Korea, but vast majority at the time would choose to go to Japan because the professional scene was better.
Okay, so you were doing that there, you were at a Go school there. Is your sense that it was like one of the best Go schools in Taipei or in Taiwan, or was it sort of a middling one?
I think it was best in the sense that it has a lot of strong players. I
Mhm.
would say that Go School was perfect for kids like me who really enjoy the game, want to pursue excellence, but we don't want to do as a career. Even to date, they are the only Go School that can have a group lesson for 5 to 7 kids. They can somehow have 20 kids, 5 to 7 sit them together in their group lesson. So it's a very unique experience, just seeing so many kids around my age, maybe a couple years older, and just learn from each other.
Sounds like a completely different environment than what I feel like I hear about or see in America. So then you arrived in the US and you were in fifth grade. What role did Go serve as you adjusted to a completely new culture in which to grow up?
At the time, it pretty much played no role because we didn't know anyone who played. So I just study on my own, maybe play against myself, read some books about Go. But a few years later, maybe 2 years later, we stumbled across a Taiwanese friend who's a dentist. And then he said, oh, one of my patient teaches Go. So let me check in on that and get back to you. That's how we connected with the local Go world.
And were you asking around a lot, or was it pure coincidence that,
It
the
was pure
dentists
coincidence. I don't even mention that I play Go because I live in North suburban Chicago. It's
Mm,
not a lot of Asian culture presence at the time, at least. So
okay.
most people don't know what Go is. They will say like, "Is it like CS:GO?" And this conversation kind of just ends there.
How did you come to study under the seven-dan professional Jiang Mingju?
That was also kind of a coincidence. So I got connected with the local Go community so that I know about some of the youth tournaments. And then in one of the tournaments, it was competing to go to the World Youth Go Championship in 2013. And I made the finals, but I lost the finals. But the finals took place in California, and then I went there. That's when I met Mingjo, who became my teacher. I really credit him for like my growth from like a 6 dan coming to the US to later become 8 dan by college.
So let's talk a little bit about your accomplishments in the Go world. So you have an impressive resume as an amateur player. So this includes playing in the 2019 World Amateur Go Championships, winning the Redmond Cup in 2015, which my understanding is quite prestigious, at least in the United States, and then several other top finishes in the Midwest Open, the Chicago Open. Was it ever an interest, or has it ever continued to be an interest to become a professional to you?
Since I started playing so young and I became kind of a strong amateur at a young age, people have asked me that throughout the years. And I'm not super interested in playing Go as a main career. Even in my Go school at the time, my teacher asked me, hey, like, do you have any interest at all in becoming a pro? Maybe we can prepare sending you to Japan and become an insei there and become a pro there. And I just told him like, no, like I want a normal career and have Go as just my hobby. And I think the enrichment from Go is very valuable and important to me. But To me, I just don't want the competition to dominate my life where winning and
Mm.
losing becomes like very material, like gains and losses.
I'm curious because, again, you've been asked this a lot of times. It makes sense because you're such a strong player. And I have seen, for example, you play against Michael Chen. You've recorded it on your YouTube channel. And my sense from Michael Chen is that gaining that professional credential allows various things. It helps you to spread Go even more and those sorts of things. But one thing it also might do is it might give you access to playing in the professional tournaments. Is that something that would interest you from sort of an intellectual, challenging perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's specifically because I'm not interested in going to professional tournament that I don't think becoming a pro is really the right path for me. I've been to a few international pair Go tournaments and of course that 2019 World Amateur Go Championship. And I really enjoyed those a lot. But I think going
Mhm.
to a professional Go tournament would be a completely different experience because there's less of that social aspect. People are there to perform their job versus me just trying to have some fun. I think the vibe will be different. And there's
Yeah.
no like tourism aspect or as much of the community building. Compared to someone like Michael, like I respect him a lot. Besides having a very successful, busy career, he dedicates a lot of time to studying and playing and competing in Go. I think compared to him, I don't spend as much time studying and playing the game myself, especially now in medical school, pursuing a medical career. So I don't see myself really competing with the likes of him or other pros. So it's better for them to, I guess, compete for the US.
What made you shift from being just a very strong player to then becoming an ambassador of the Evanston Go Club to then becoming a tournament organizer with this year's Chicago Open? How did that come about?
I think there were a few things that kind of sowed the seed and paved the way for it. One is in high school, I did participate in the American Go Honor Society. It's a high school student-led youth Go group that hosts online events and now gradually grown to now very established. They do several events a year with good prizes and programming. So I did that for a little bit. That was my kind of first taste of community organizing for Go events. My first introduction to real life events or local events was right after the pandemic. I've always had an idea of just inviting more high dom players and having an even non-handicap section in our local Evanston tournaments. And for
Mhm.
those of you who don't know, Evanston Go Club is the biggest Go chapter in Illinois and one of the biggest in the Midwest. For many, many years now, we host the only tournament in the state. We usually get about 30, 40 players, and traditionally it has been a handicap tournament. Sometimes I'm the only Dom player, or maybe one of three or four. So I always ask Mark, who is our club president, hey, like let's try to have a formal non-handicap section and be more welcoming to, I guess, high Dom players. So that was set the way. Of course, COVID stalled things a little bit, but by 2021, I think we had a good idea. Like we're seeing a lot of energy in a local Go club. Week after week, we're hitting like new record in terms of turnout. So I told him like, let's make
Wow.
it happen in 2022. At the time, my conservative estimate was it would just be a normal tournament, 40 people. But if we somehow make everything right, I think maybe we can get 70 because I'm meeting so many new players online. And then turns out we got 84. That was even beyond my off the charts estimate. Yeah, so I guess to sum it up, the primary motivation for the first tournament was because I want to play in person even games in my area. And then I guess after a year and a half, I became the organizer, not the player.
What do you find most rewarding about organizing it that you don't get just as a competitor? And maybe what about the other way around?
Yeah, I think it's really meeting and talking to more people. When you're playing, you're spending maybe 12 hours a day there and then 7, 8 hours playing. But as an organizer, you're spending your day walking around, connecting with different people and connecting people to other people. So a
Hmm.
lot of times people come to me like, I'm from Memphis or Columbus, and I want to come and say, oh, I know so and so who's coming. Maybe you can carpool together. And I made a few arrangements like that and then really help them find the local Go club. So being able to do things like that, providing a platform for players to connect with each other and really building the relationship, I think that's been really valuable. As a player, you just don't get that. I mean, the tournament is for the player, but in the tournament, the player is not the center. It's really the organizers who can help direct and connect everyone.
What about the other way around? I mean, what do you find rewarding about being a player that maybe you don't get as an organizer?
That answer is very obvious. It's just you don't get as much game time. And sometimes I'll walk around and see like, oh, this game is really interesting. I wish I can join them for the review, but I can't because there's so many games and I need to set up the next round or talk to this parent to settle some logistic issues and to make sure that the bathrooms have toilet paper and the lunch is coming on time.
All the glorious parts of being an organizer. You have to make sure all the details are
Yeah.
there. So, given your work with clubs, with organizing in the US, what do you think are things that we can be focusing on in the Go community in the US that might help to increase the game's visibility?
Yeah, so that's has always been an ongoing discussion. I'm in this Discord called Midwest Go Association, and a lot of people have brought up various ideas. I don't really know that much about getting just complete strangers, people with no exposure into the game. And from my involvement in the tournament, I think what I'm trying to get at is for people to become more interested. Like at the DDK, go to the first tournament, I want them to feel welcome and be more invested so they can come back next year or next tournament to become like a SDK or just kind of cultivating the desire to climb up the Go ladder and
Mm.
pursue excellence in the game. Having more events and more ways for players to connect with each other will organically grow the community like that. At a certain point, it will branch off. Our tournament didn't grow because I'm the only one advertising it. It kind of came about because there's several local clubs who just shown a lot of increase in attendance, and then we just built on top of that. And of course, it has to be something feeding into the local club. Maybe it's better outreach to the students in local universities. There are a few high school clubs locally now. So I think little things like that will matter. My work has been focusing more on, I guess, the middle to the back end for those who are already in the Go Club or have at least a little bit of interest in competing. But I think in all of those aspects is people putting into work and organizing, whether it's through a tournament, a local club. Our club president, Mark, he just showed up at a Starbucks 25 years in a row every single Wednesday, 45 weeks out of the year. So that level of consistency was what
Wow.
set the foundation for like a 120 player tournament with international guests. It doesn't have to take 25 years. You have to see the energy and then build on top of it. I think it's always been around here. Like our local tournament had 30 to or 40 players for decades now. Like going back 15 years, we have 40 players. It just that sometimes it required a few more people, maybe like me, to make that extra step because someone like Mark, he's already going once or twice a week. The same person hosting club every week will not be the same person to think of all these various ideas to host fun side events like my big tournament. So I think we have to see the role that can best suit us and really take the lead from there.
So now that you've done 5 tournaments and helped organize them, what do you think about the whole process? The amount of work involved? You've also gained sponsorship for the event and things like this. Take us through high level that process of organizing the event and then saying, how do we do this better next time?
That's something we always think about. And because naturally you're doing this for fun, we don't have to do it. So when we're
Yeah.
doing it, we might as well make it the best that it can be. And Go tournament, it doesn't have to be complicated, right? Everyone knows it. Fundamentally, is a bunch of people finding a few tables to sit down and play Go. So
Mhm.
that aspect is very straightforward. The other things are just to make the experience more pleasurable, more formal, like having coffee and donuts, have a nice quiet room, making sure that people feel welcome, have photographers, things like that. So at the beginning, we start very simple, just build from our previous little tournaments. And then later people start asking, hey, we're getting 80 people or like 100 people from all over the Midwest. Are there sponsorships? Like, what can I do to help? And that's when we start to realize, oh, like we can actually build because it's not just me or Mark doing everything. When you put in the work yourself, I think other people see it. And that energy become contagious for others to want to join in. It doesn't have to be on a large scale. Like I think a lot of communities want to have 100 player tournaments, but if you're one guy putting in good work, I think it's easy for other people to feel that and want to help. So getting back to the sponsorship thing, we didn't have to work much for our first corporate sponsorship because it was one of our players who got his employer to sponsor us. So that was just a natural branch off of, I guess, our solid organizing efforts.
If you can have it come relatively naturally like that, it makes you wonder about what the benefit would be if there were more financial support. Did you feel that getting that financial support was sufficient? Was it enough? Did you just make it work? How did that go?
So this is the ongoing conversation for us too, because quite frankly, when we try to make the tournaments bigger, we did increase our registration fee. A lot of tournaments ask for no registration or $10, $15. Our one day asks for, I think, 30 to 45, depending on if you're Dan or like Q player or like high Dan player. And then our Chicago Open, it was 60 to 85 if you register late. So it's on the higher end, but having this fund allow us to do all the fun things and put in the work of organizing, having a hotel ballroom. So I think it's a push and pull of making people more invested. And I think one way is making people feel like this is not something they want to flake like last minute because we put in a lot of work into it. And this is going to be like a real legit event. Maybe it's like a strange way of putting it, but having a real budget is an important aspect of us putting together big events. Our budget went from a few $100s to by the Chicago Open like over 10,000. So it's from various things like having meal plans, dinner parties, all that.
I've heard this talking with other folks in the community about not just lowering the registration fees, or if it's for gaining membership to an organization, you might want to increase it. People might really see value in that. And then it gives you all this financial flexibility to really enjoy it, right? Like book the ballroom, like you said, at the hotel and those sorts of things. So that's really encouraging to hear that. Do you feel like for you and for Mark, was there a moment when it was all done, when the tournament was over, where you're like, wow, like this was awesome. I loved this.
Every time. And of course, we will reflect on our experience. And every time, I think just people are very gracious, even when things don't work out completely.
Yeah.
Like one time, our venue's toilet broke down and we had to walk across the street and like get a plumber here. And then I was really nervous, but people were like, okay, you're doing great. I know this is outside of your control. Like we get it. It will be okay. And I was just like very grateful for how everyone really respond to, I guess, the little imperfections. And I think that was really rewarding to see everything come together in that night and meeting different people. You mentioned like, I guess, a discussion about budget, whether better financial support will really be important. And I think for us is help us grow. And I think the important thing is not like how much you charge, whether it's $10 or $20 or like $50, is really the attitude coming in, because we don't want to be cheap. And there's a difference between trying to charge a lot of money or just trying to be like cheap bare minimum. I think fundamentally, most people come to the tournament 1 day or 2 day. They're dedicating most of their weekend here. So they're not coming here to save money. If you want to save money, you will just stay at home and do something else. Now, people have different budget price points that they're comfortable with, of course. But fundamentally, I think they want a nice experience, a fulfilling weekend. And it's not about like whether they pay $20 or $50. And another way is now that we have a lot of travelers coming from out of state, their expenses in their fuel and travel is not even in the registration. So then that, I think, gives us even more of incentive to make sure that the venue experience, the competition experience, accommodation is really up to standards for people to want to travel maybe half a day or a day to come to our tournament.
Given that whole thought process and what you have found and Mark has found through going through and organizing these tournaments, does it feel like a huge leap to then think about the world major tournaments, right? Where the In Cup is offering $400,000 as the top prize, right? Which is a completely different thing. In your mind, does it feel like a huge leap to say we could get a corporate sponsor and we could adjust registration fees to a level of financial resource where it might attract players from further away and from different abilities and provide, even more opportunities?
Yeah, that's a good thought. We always have back and forth on prize money. So we do have a prize pool for open section, the 5 Dan and above, and sometimes for the main divisions. But from my personal experience and what I have heard from most people, I think the prize money is not like a huge concern, because Devin actually told me a really wonderful quote. He said, if people want to make money, they will just work. They don't come to go tournaments to make money. I think having the prize money is nice because when you receive it is a validation of your performance and your effort and expertise, but it's not like the money itself. Getting $500 in a weekend won't change your life. So from that angle, I think I would have a good amount prize pool, like a couple $100. But I think $3,000, I don't think for our scale of tournament that would be the best use of funds. And especially as you said earlier, like organizing really comes from the bottom up. So our bulk of the players are DDKs and maybe like the high single digit queues. So
Mhm.
they're not coming here to win the grand trophy or anything. They
Right,
just want
right.
here to have rated games and like have a serious day of go. So
Sure.
I'd rather invest in customized trophies and maybe like certificates, like kind of Asia, when you win a tournament, you get promotion certificates, something like that, to make a more personalized experience and invest in those things that will be long lasting and build memory rather than increasing amount of prize pool. Because fundamentally, I think that's a little more democratic and applicable to everyone. I've been a strong player most of my life and competing in competitive tournaments. And I can tell you, like, even when I'm so close to winning a big prize money, like that prize money doesn't matter that much. And in a
Mhm.
sense, it can add on to the competition pressure. Whereas if you get a nice souvenir from the tournament, regardless of your performance, I think you can have something to sit on and bring home.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the other things that you do in the Go community. So you have your YouTube channel providing great content. You have your 2021 book on your games during the championships and reviewing them with the AI analysis. You have the NAOL reviews, and then you've also done commentating for the pro qualifiers. I remember you did them in 2023. They highlight your ability to just explain complex situations that are happening on the board and break them down in a way that's helpful. What do you find you enjoy the most when you're reviewing games for others?
I think gradually from improving, you start to develop your own way of thinking about things. And a lot of times, other players at club meetings will just ask me, like, how do you think about this? And then I'll see their thought process. And seeing that is really interesting to me. There's an Asian quote called Sultan. Like, it basically means you're communicating over the board. You're trying to figure out your opponent's thought process. And I think fundamentally reviewing and explaining moves is part of that. Nowadays, everyone can open an AI and try to find the quote unquote optimal move. But when you're actually playing the game, you still have to think through every move using, I guess, our human logic. So I think helping people bridge a gap, like explaining moves, even though they don't understand yet in terms that they can digest, I think is very interesting to me. Just as I improved throughout the years, books that made the most sense to me were never like the strongest players explaining their moves. It's those who can distill their thought process down to a smaller chunk that just, I guess, ordinary players can understand. That becomes the most impactful. So at a certain point, I think I have enough knowledge to share. So I want to be that person for other players.
And I can see how that could be really fulfilling to help people understand and kind of pull back the layers, right? The veil to say, okay, this is a way you could be thinking about it. Did you see it that way? Or trying to get a sense for how they're thinking about it so you can then help them adjust their thinking.
Yeah, and some of that doesn't only go one way too. Like I can be stronger than most players, but sometimes like I see players, even games I won, they just have this incredible idea. Like in my Midwest Open game 2 years ago, I played against Eric Yoder 6 down. I won that game, but in the middle, he just played out a broken ladder sequence that had like a 40, 50 point trade that turned out to be about even. And then he saw that maybe 20 moves before I considered it. And it's
Incredible.
only like during the game, after the game, you just start to discuss like what he's thinking about, compare that to what I was thinking about. And I think it's through this like clash of ideas and thought process that we can improve. And I think that's part of what makes Go so enriching. I think in most other games, like this type of thing just doesn't happen as much.
Because you just think there's not as much opportunity for creativity.
Yeah, I think Go has a good mix of memorization, strategy, and reading, and you need a little of the intuition. So you can have your own style. Like maybe you can say all the top professional players, their style converge to like AI style. But if you see like 10 different 5 down players, they all have different styles and preferences, and they're all valid. And I think that's very incredible.
Do you find any ways that you connect with Go, whether it be through your work and your studying or your other interests, like your running or your ping pong?
Yeah, I think it's the thinking and thought process. Like academia is very rigorous and logic based. And I think maybe my interest of that partially just overlap with my interest in Go because you need very logical, methodological way of approaching each board situation. And in school, that's exactly what is required. So I think that same kind of brain allows me to pursue both aspects. And to a certain extent, I did track and field in high school. I brought that approach to running too, just being very organized, very self-reflective. That's something I learned in Go that has helped me in all aspects, whether studying for tests or track and field. Like watch my videos in running, like try to review my form and then improve next time. So it's the exact same approach as playing a game of Go. You play your game, review it, maybe with a teacher, and then think about your mistakes and then how to improve that next time. So not about like blindly copying someone else who's better, but improving from your current self into a better self that it's approachable and digestible. And like you can do it in a stepwise fashion. Whereas if you just blindly follow others, that will never be yours because you can't internalize. So having this mindset, I think, has helped me tremendously in many fields outside of Go.
Do you still run?
Yeah, I run for fun now. So in high school, I was a competitive sprinter and hurdler. Was a state finalist. I was
Wow.
recruited to run in college, but I decided I would just pursue other interests, like have more time to play Go.
How much on average do you think you get to play Go?
Playing is, I think, a little bit variable, but maybe on average once a week.
Hmm.
Sometimes a little less, just because, for example, when I'm organizing running my tournament, I'm not playing Go. So
Sure.
paradoxically, running the tournament gave me less time, even though I'm meeting more Go players. Yeah, so I think
Drawbacks,
overall,
yeah.
I don't play that much myself. Even when I play online, I mostly play against some of the strong like 5, 6 dans I know. Part of it is just like it's fun to play against people and I think part of it is I want to help train them. Like help them get to the next North American pro by being their training partner.
Do you find that there's a certain length of time that you might go without playing Go where you worry, oh gosh, am I starting to lose some strength?
A tiny bit in the sense that your reading is not quite as sharp, but I think overall you don't really lose much skill from not playing, especially in the scale of like several months. Go is one of those games where even the elderly are really competitive. You don't lose a lot just from aging. I think on the contrary, sometimes as you age, especially from like kids to young adult to adult, you gain the maturity and having a better mentality, like a more stable mindset. You improve in the game even without studying it. I think that has been the case for me. Like I maybe less nervous or consistent.
Hmm.
I don't get sidetracked in my thought process as much. And that a lot of time will overcome the maybe rustiness of reading or like you miss a few tomato life and death here and there. But if you're playing the right direction, then sometimes that matters more than your reading.
It almost makes me think about when you're doing workouts. And I remember being told when I first started working out, they would say, when you first start lifting weights, you're going to have big improvement. You're going to be able to start lifting heavier weights in a relatively short period of time. But that might not be because your muscle is getting stronger. It might actually be that your body and your brain is building better coordination to lift that weight in a certain way. And then it's after that you start to build muscle. So, in sort of a similar way, you're saying, hey, I improve by getting better at reading or playing more and more. But on the other side to that, I can also enact better psychological techniques. I can make sure I'm being focused. I can make sure I'm calm. I can practice, mindfulness, all these sorts of things. And that will improve your play even without you learning a new shape or learning a new Joseki.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think reading, it's a kind of abstract thing. Everyone's think that reading is bad, but fundamentally, it's also how efficient you're reading. Basically, you can have a really strong engine, but if it just run like kind of empty, then you're not going to get much out of it. A fun example of that is when adults play against kids. So 9 out of 10 times the kids will read it way faster. They play instantly, but adults can still manage to win because adults can see the big picture. Maybe they start more favorable fights. They are not emotionally driven. So there are other ways besides just straight up reading, like how fast you see things, that you can excel in the game. And I think as you get older or gain more experience, reading becomes an essential but not like a dominating factor.
It almost really epitomizes what we talk about with the benefits of being younger versus older. When you think about life experience or doing a job, you might have that quicker working memory as a younger person, but there's all these things of maturity that you get, and that very much carries over to Go. Cool. Albert, thank you so much for your time. A real pleasure. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Travis.
Xiao Dai and Gazza White are now going to chat with us about Ichiriki Ryo and his resurgence to the top level of professional Go, as well as the state of Japanese Go, where things have come from and where they might be going. This will probably be a little bit dated as of when we actually published this recording, but I know recently there's been some interesting waves around Japanese players making some inroads and resurgence at the top with Ichiriki Ryo. I don't know if either of you wanted to speak to that at all.
Actually, Xiao Dai mentioned this on one of his posts on Reddit, that Ichiriki Ryo had an interview maybe a year or so ago where he was expressed his determination to do well in international Go, and he's concerned that Japanese Go would continue to languish behind Korea and China if they didn't get some sort of improvements in the international scene, which I found was interesting for him to say, considering that the domestic scene in Japan is by far the most lucrative in terms of prize money.
Over the Korean one?
The Korean one.
Or is that only world majors? Is that what I'm thinking?
Yeah, the world majors are lucrative, but the Korean domestic scene, the prize money is quite small. Certainly compared to Japan, tournaments like the Kisei and Meijin in Japan, I think maybe about $300,000 for first place US. Whereas in Korea, the top domestic tournaments don't get you more than 70,000 US dollars. And the world majors are roughly the same as the Japanese domestic tournaments. So it makes sense that the Japanese would focus on the domestic tournaments, considering they're easier to win than the world majors and they give you the same amount of money. But Ichiriki, he wants Japanese Go to be taken sort of more seriously in the international scene. They don't just want to be, third place continuously. And this year, he's actually made a big breakthrough by reaching the final of the Ing Cup, which is, as we already said, one of the big world majors. It's actually got the biggest prize money. I think it's 400,000 US dollars. But this is, I think, the first time in 6 years that a Japanese player has even made a final of a world major. The last one to make the final was Yamauta in 2018 in the LG Cup. So it's a bit of a breakthrough for Japan, and hopefully a sign of things to come.
I was just going to add, this 6 years gap kind of understated how dire the situation for Japan is at the very pinnacle of international Go. Before Yamauta made the LG Cup final in 2018, the previous finalist, believe it or not, was, I believe, in 2006, where Japan actually won. Cho Yu, representing Japan, had actually won the LG Cup. So there was a 12-year gap before this 6 years gap. And
wow,
if you can imagine, in almost 20 years, Japan has only reached the final twice. That's just not quite befitting a major Go nation. Of course, if you consider there's about 3 to 5 international majors being run every year, so there would have been close to maybe 60 to 100 titles being decided in that 20-year period. But Japan has only made a final twice, which is quite remarkable.
And what's your thought on that? I mean, it's obviously very difficult to say, oh, yes, this is the reason why of the 3 kingdoms of Go, Japan has just been faltering and struggling. But can you just share any of your thoughts on, hey, this might be some of the reasons why?
So I do believe in Japan. I think since some kind of education reform, the kids, they're not allowed to study Go in substitution to their school. Whereas in China and Korea, I do believe it's quite common for kids to drop out of the main education system entirely and just focus on Weiqi and Baduk. They don't need to go to school. And I believe in Japan, that's actually not allowed. Now, if I go back to some of the legends of Japanese Go, I can't remember his name. His name in English has just escaped me, but he died quite young in mid-50s. He was one of the Super Six of Japanese Go. And one of the interesting things in his autobiography was it told a story of him being sent to a master to learn Go under. And I believe he was around 8 or 9 at that point. So he was the best player in his region in Japan. So his parents sent him to study under this great master, so living away from home. And he basically lived in this master's home, and he had to do things like wipe the floor or, help with the cooking or whatever it is. So basically he doesn't get paid, and the only thing he gets is tuition in Go in return, basically, that kind of thing. So those systems used to exist in Japan. And the interesting thing was maybe after 2 weeks there, he hated the life there because it was so hard. It was so brutal that he had to do all the housework, all the heavy lifting at the age of 8 or 9. So he wrote a letter to his parents saying that, the teacher here doesn't want to teach me anything. I don't really want to study here anymore. I want to go home. And his parents replied with a letter saying, we are actually really ashamed of you. We know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get out of this because it's some kind of difficulty. You must face this difficulty head on. We will not let you get out of this school. You must continue to stay there and study Go. That was the kind of system that happened maybe just 60, 70 years ago. And that is no longer possible, as you can imagine in the modern world with kids. Yeah, they don't do that anymore with Japan. That is kind of one of the reasons they put up for why Japan is no longer able to compete with Japan and Korea, where they are willing to put their kids through, pull them out of school and study Go full time.
I do think that in Japan, they have to do junior high school. I think high school there is split into junior and senior high school. And I think it's required to do junior high school, but not senior high school.
Right. I don't know if nationalistic feelings have anything to do with this. It still blows my mind how Korea came to dominate the world of Baduk. Because obviously before the Second World War, professional Go was only organized in Japan. China and Korea had nothing, no professional system, maybe just some amateurs playing. And then Cho Han-hyun, who was basically the first gen of Korean players, he became very strong in Baduk, but he studied in Japan as well. But then he kind of had to go back to Korea to fulfill his military service, and he kind of just stayed in Korea to play. When they decided to set up the first kind of international Go tournament, which was the In Cup, that was back in 1988, and they decided to hold a tournament somewhere around 1989. So when they set up the international Go tournament, that was a new thing. People didn't really play internationally. I think before the In Cup, the only regular international competition was between China and Japan, where they had kind of invented the win and continue tournament format. But it was only China and Japan. And maybe in people's minds back then, they didn't even think that Korea played Baduk seriously. But whatever it was, the In Cup kind of recognized that there are actually pros in Korea. So I think I can't remember how many players played in the first In Cup, maybe 16 or something. They had only reserved one spot for the Korean players. And I do believe the Korean Baduk Association kind of protested that decision back then. Is that Korea has had a professional system for like 20 years at that point, Why did you only assign me one spot?
I heard slightly different. I got the impression they were assigned 0 spots. And
Right.
It was after that protest that they were charitably given just the one spot in the first place.
So yeah, now that could have been true as well. So to my mind, it's kind of interesting because it felt like Japan and China were kind of ignorant of Korean Go, even though Korean Go's were at the pinnacle anyway, were standing at least shoulder to shoulder to them, at least. This is back in the 80s, late 80s. And what's even more interesting was that even though Korea had only received the one spot, they had actually won that first In Cup. And not only did they win the first In Cup, they had won the next 3. So the first 4 In Cup over a 16-year span were all won by the Koreans. And I can understand why to some it just kind of came out of nowhere. And I can't really explain if it's because, for example, Cho Han-hyun, he's done so well for Korea, even though they were kind of considered not really on the map. And that kind of ignited some kind of nationalistic fervor in Korea, so that
Sure.
more people want to play. And kind of same thing happened in China. So maybe back then, the only kind of world-class player in China was maybe Nie Wei-ping, who actually made the final of the first In Cup, losing to Cho Han-hyun 3-2. And Nie Wei-ping, he was a huge hero in China. I remember growing up in China in the mid-90s. I would open up any newspaper, a sports newspaper, a finance newspaper, whatever it may be. There's some journalist interviewing Nie Wei-ping, asking him for his opinion on anything. Could be anything from economy, who's going to win the World Cup in soccer, like anything. He was so big. And the reason why he was so big was because he had helped China win against Japan the first 3 China versus Japan international win and continue tournament. He was big. He was the person in China. Now, he was so big in China that he regularly played bridge with Deng Xiaoping, who's basically the Chinese
The leader.
at that
Wow.
time. So he was like a revered figure. Even till this day, he's still alive. And now he still appears on TV all the time. Of course, Nie's influence on a generation or 2 of Chinese young players was probably quite remarkable. So like Gu Li and all that, and all those Chinese players would have grown up under the influence of Nie. So I do wonder if those 2 persons, Cho Han-hyun and Nie Wei-ping, being able to help their nation defeat Japan, or in the case of Korea, defeat a big nation like China and Japan, kind of helped, fuel the popularity of Go for that 30 to 40 years, which I believe now is kind of, it feels like in China and Korea, the popularity of Baduk and Weiqi are kind of on a fairly steep decline. But I do wonder sometimes if those 2 kind of heroic figures, for their respective nations have kind of helped put Baduk and Weiqi, on the map for those nations and help them to remain so strong for 30, 40 years.
And I do wonder, it's like because you had that very powerful figure, that one person that really took the spotlight and really took people's imagination and really spread in the mainstream, that probably is what you need, right? Among other things, to really start a spark of interest and then a real development of interest and hopefully eventually skill and ability to reach the higher levels of playing Go, Weiqi, Baduk, when in what would be the 40s, the 50s, it was really Japan was likely at the top. Would that be fair?
Yeah, sure. I would say for maybe like 100 years before the 80s, or maybe even more, Japan was the only country with an organized pro system. So yeah, you would have to say Japan was the undisputed leader in World Go, maybe even 300, 400 years prior to the 1980s.
We're back with BenKyo, where I get to ask him some fun random questions about Go as well as a lightning round. Let's go to that conversation now. Does the name Go in English help the game
No.
or hurt the game, in your opinion, in the West?
Nope, it has terrible SEO, and anything that's a game called Go, it's like CS:GO, Pokemon Go. It's not our game.
Search engine optimization is horrible for the letters G-O in English.
That's why my own Go business is called BenKyo Baduk. Weiqi or Weiqi in Cantonese, that's hard to say. I'm not even intonating it properly. And Go has no SEO, so.
What's the worst piece of advice you've been given about playing Go?
Oh, that's a tough one. Worst piece of advice for playing Go? Never deviate from Joseki, or
Yeah.
don't play anything you've never seen before,
Mm.
or quit playing if you don't rank up or if you don't hit your goals.
Do you come across a lot of students that you end up realizing like they just care about getting a high rank, like the whole like winning thing?
To some extent, yeah. I think many players, including myself at one point,
Yeah.
suffer from a kind of toxic relationship with the ranks in Go. Now, I don't know if ELO
Yes.
only would alleviate some of this or not, but people get very, very stressed and depressed about it, and they will avoid games and cherry pick their games, and it's really it's a problem, actually.
I've fallen into that trap as well. And now when I play on OGS, I always hide my rank. Actually, even the other person I play, I'll set a range of level I want to play against, but not knowing it, I'm incredibly grateful. And then maybe I feed into what you're saying though, because then I will only try to look, only do the show ranking if I've been on a win streak.
Right,
But you know
exactly.
what?
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, if that gives me like a positive momentum boost of just playing, not necessarily caring about rank, just playing, then like fine. But to your points, like we need to also really like and enjoy losing as well. And I think we're not set up that way in this culture.
Right.
What time format for a game do you enjoy most and why?
Byoyomi is what I'm used to, and so far it's what I like the most. I actually don't have enough experience yet in Fisher, but I'm probably going to like Fisher time more than Canadian Byoyomi.
Who's your favorite Go player and why in a way that maybe outsiders to the game might understand?
My favorite is Lee Chang-ho, the Stone Buddha. He was also the favorite of my first teacher. Actually, my first teacher made quite an impact on me. I've had a few teacher figures, but I see a lot of my first teacher, Jeffrey, in the way that I teach, actually, in some ways. But anyway, like Lee Chang-ho, he kind of played to what I thought that my natural tendencies in Go were, which was to go for like calm, sort of like peaceful, except when it's suboptimal kind of thing, and focusing on doing well at endgame and that kind of thing. That was always my cup of tea before. And I just always found Lee Chang-ho's moves, or at least I don't know how much he changed his style in the last few years, but very kind of natural and very easy to understand. Like I would replay his games both kind of now and when I was much weaker. And I recommend it to students a lot too, because you can actually understand what he's doing. It doesn't feel as much of like deep reading behind it where you kind of think you understand, but you definitely don't.
Do you still feel like you in some way connect with his style in terms of your style of play, or has that
Yes.
changed?
Still to a pretty good extent, yeah. Even though I've made mine a lot more spicier continuously, but still there's a lot in common there.
Cool.
And I usually recommend him for students of mine who play a little too complicated or too fancy, too messy, too many attaches, too many invasions, that kind of stuff, just
Got
to
it.
calm them down. Yeah.
Yes. As we wrap up this episode, let me leave you with a silly question. You have to go live on a desert island with one other person, and you're bringing your Go stuff. Beyond bringing a Go board and stones, who would be the other person you would bring with whom you could play? And it could be anybody, a famous professional player, your buddy, whoever. And what would be your top Go objects that you would bring, whether it's a book, a movie, a video? What would it be? Think about it. Thanks so much. Talk to you next time.